I never knew my son would do this to me. Now, I must live with this regret for the rest of my life. But here's how it all began. The living room was dim, the faint glow of a table lamp casting long shadows across the walls. I sat there, staring at the untouched plate of dinner I had prepared for Michael, now cold and forgotten. The house was quieter since my husband's passing, a silence that had settled over us like a heavy blanket. But I had always believed Michael and I were managing, leaning on each other in the way we needed most. Before we go further, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more true confession story like this one. It wasn't long after his girlfriend left him that everything changed. He'd been devastated, his heart shattered in a way I hadn't seen before. Michael had always been strong, composed, but this breakup had left him vulnerable, raw. I remembered finding him slumped on the couch, his face buried in his hands as he tried to hold back tears. She said I wasn't enough, he'd muttered, his voice breaking. I didn't hesitate. I sat beside him, pulling him into a hug, the kind I used to give him when he was a little boy with scraped knees. You're more than enough, I told him. She couldn't see it, but I do. From that day on, Michael started confiding in me more. At first, it was small things, how his day went, memories of his father, and even mundane complaints about work. But gradually, the conversations deepened. He'd sit at the kitchen table with me, talking late into the night about his fears, his loneliness, and the void left by his dad. I listened, offering advice when I could, though most of the time, I simply let him talk. It felt good to be needed again, to be his anchor in a world that often felt too big for him. But as the weeks went on, something shifted. His vulnerability, his reliance on me, began to feel heavier. He looked at me differently, his words carrying a tone I couldn't quite place. I tried to brush it off as lingering grief and heartbreak, but in the quiet moments, I couldn't ignore the tension building between us. It wasn't the bond we'd had before, it was something more complex, something neither of us knew how to navigate. And that's when I realized how delicate this new dynamic truly was. One evening, Michael surprised me with an idea. Let's go to the cinema, he said, his tone unusually upbeat. One of Dad's favorite movies is playing in the classic lineup. I hesitated, unsure if revisiting the past was the best idea. Are you sure? I asked, searching his face for any sign of doubt. I think it'll be good, he replied, his gaze steady. We could use a break, don't you think? Before I could second-guess myself, we were in the car, the quiet hum of the engine accompanying us as we drove through the dimly lit streets. The theater wasn't crowded, and Michael chose seats at the back, far from the handful of other viewers scattered around the room. The movie began, and for a while, I let myself get lost in the story. It was one we'd seen countless times as a family, back when laughter filled our lives, before everything changed. Michael leaned slightly toward me during a pivotal scene. Dad loved this part, didn't he? He whispered. I nodded, smiling faintly. He did. He always said it reminded him of us. As the movie continued, Michael sat closer, his presence more noticeable than usual. At an emotional part of the film, I felt his hand take mine, his grip firm but gentle. I glanced at him, surprised, and his expression was calm but intent. Thanks for this, he said softly. For always being here. You don't have to thank me, I replied, trying to sound steady. As the credits rolled, he turned to me and pulled me into a hug. It wasn't unusual. Michael had always been affectionate, but something about it felt different, heavier, like he was holding onto more than he was saying. I hugged him back, but as we stood in the quiet of the empty theater, I couldn't ignore the way the moment felt. When we got to the car, the silence between us was comfortable, though my mind wouldn't settle. As we pulled into the driveway, Michael turned to me with a faint smile. I'm glad we did that, he said. I think Dad would have been happy. I nodded, offering a small smile of my own. He would have been. Back inside, I couldn't shake the evening from my thoughts. As we sat in the living room, Michael leaned down to kiss my cheek, a quick, innocent peck that caught me off guard. It was something he'd done countless times before, but tonight it felt different. My heart raced, and a strange warmth spread through me that I couldn't explain. It was at this point his hands rested on mine. He kissed my lips. I felt a thick lump in my throat. What was going on? My heart was racing faster. He then cupped my face in a kiss. It was happening too fast. It was at this point he whispered into my ears, "Mom, I want you." I was still motionless when it happened. Yes, we did it. When it was all over, I was clearly shaking. I quickly pulled myself together, forcing a laugh to ease the moment. "You're being extra sweet tonight," I said lightly. Michael smiled, his gaze steady. "You deserve it." He said it so simply, so sincerely, that I didn't know how to respond. I excused myself shortly after, retreating to my room, where the weight of the evening hit me fully. It had been innocent. Everything had been innocent, but there was something about that small moment that unsettled me deeply. This was grief, I told myself. It had to be. Grief played tricks on the mind, made simple gestures feel like something more. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, the feeling refused to fade. And that's when I knew things between us had started to change in ways I wasn't sure I could control. "I'm going to head upstairs and take a quick shower," I said, already making my way toward the stairs. As I climbed, the weight of the evening settled over me like a thick blanket. Reaching the top, I paused and turned back toward the hallway. That's when I saw him, Michael, standing at the bottom of the stairs, his gaze fixed on me. His expression was difficult to read, a mixture of thoughtfulness and something else I couldn't quite place. I felt a strange heat rise in my chest, an unfamiliar sensation that unsettled me. "Good night, Michael," I said quickly, dismissing the moment as nothing more than my overactive mind. He nodded, his gaze lingering before he turned toward the living room. In the bathroom, the shower's hot water did little to quiet the thoughts running through my head. I replayed the hug, the way his arms had felt so protective yet so intentional. Then I thought of the look he'd given me at the stairs, a look that seemed to hold more than what words could convey. "It's nothing," I muttered under my breath, turning off the water and wrapping myself in a towel. "He's just going through a lot." But the unsettled feeling in my chest refused to fade. Downstairs, I could hear Michael moving about, the faint clink of a glass and the low hum of the TV. I dried off quickly and changed into my nightclothes, determined to push the night's events out of my mind. As I passed by the mirror, though, I caught my reflection, my face flushed and my expression uncertain. The night stretched on, and as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the unease. I had spent the past year trying to be strong for Michael, trying to fill the gaps left by his father's death. I had been his anchor, his confidant, his rock. But something had shifted, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The memory of his hug replayed in my mind, the way he'd held on just a second too long, the firmness of his grip. And that look that seemed to say so much more than he ever had allowed. I stared at the ceiling, the darkness of the room doing nothing to calm my restless thoughts. Was this all in my head? Was grief distorting my perception, making me see something that wasn't really there? Or was there something deeper at play, something neither of us was ready to confront? The sound of his footsteps retreating down the hall should have brought relief, but instead, it left me feeling even more unsettled. I sat in the silence of my room, staring at the closed door, my thoughts spiraling in a way I couldn't control. I replayed the night over and over, the hug, the look in his eyes, the hesitation in his voice. Something had shifted between us, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I lay back against the pillows, closing my eyes in an attempt to calm my mind. But sleep wouldn't come. The weight of the uncertainty, the questions I couldn't answer, pressed down on me until I felt like I couldn't breathe. A half-hour passed, maybe more, when I heard the sound of footsteps again. They were slower this time, deliberate, as they moved down the hall toward my room. My pulse quickened, and before I could fully process it, there was another soft knock. "Mom?" Michael's voice was quiet, almost tentative. "Yes," I replied, trying to steady my breathing. The door creaked open slightly, just enough for him to step inside. He closed it behind him, his expression difficult to read in the dim light. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his tone subdued. I nodded, sitting up straighter in bed. "What's on your mind?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I was ready to hear the answer. He hesitated, his hands fidgeting at his sides. I've been thinking a lot about us. About everything we've been through since Dad died. His voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability in it that made my chest tighten. We've been through a lot, Michael, I said gently. But we've always had each other. He nodded, taking a few steps closer until he was sitting at the edge of my bed. You've been everything to me, Mom. You've been my rock, my comfort, my home. The words hung in the air, heavy and charged with an emotion I didn't want to name. Michael, you're my son, I said firmly, trying to ground us both. And I love you. But these feelings you're having, they're complicated because of everything we've lost. I know, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I know it's wrong, but I can't stop feeling this way. You're the only one who's ever truly been there for me. Tears welled up in his eyes, and I felt my heart break for him, for the confusion, the pain, and the loneliness he was clearly carrying. But I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't let him cross a line that we could never come back from. I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. Michael, listen to me, I said, my voice calm but firm. You're grieving. We both are. But we can't let that grief twist the bond we have. I'll always be here for you, but as your mother. That's the love we share, and that's where it has to stay. He looked at me, his face a mix of sadness and something else I couldn't quite define. Slowly, he nodded, though his movements were heavy. I'm sorry, he murmured. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. It's okay, I said softly. We're going to get through this, Michael. Together. But we need to take a step back and find some space to heal. He stood, hesitating for a moment before turning toward the door. Good night, Mom, he said quietly. Good night, I replied, watching as he left the room. As the door closed behind him, I let out a shaky breath, tears slipping down my cheeks. The weight of the moment pressed down on me, and I couldn't shake the fear of what might come next. The bond we had always shared felt fractured now, strained by emotions that neither of us fully understood. And I didn't know how to repair it without losing him or myself in the process. Ensure to subscribe to this channel. Tell me what you think about this story. Was it okay for her to feel the way she did? If you were her son, how would you have handled your heartbreak? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm dying to hear from you.